In the heart of downtown Chicago, the advertising firm of Sterling and Reeves was a well-oiled machine. It was a place of innovation, of youth, of relentless momentum. And for 22 years, the steady, calming heartbeat of that machine was a woman named Eleanor Price. The last box, the sleek, high-rise office of Sterling and Reeves hummed with the synthetic energy of modern enterprise. Located in the heart of downtown Chicago, the advertising firm was a temple of glass, steel, and ambition. Computer monitors glowed like a constellation of tiny blue suns. The relentless click-clack of keyboards provided percussive soundtrack, and the aroma of expensive espresso hung in the air-conditioned atmosphere. It was a place that worshipped at the altars of innovation, disruption, and youth. And for 22 years, the steady, calming, and utterly indispensable heartbeat of this well-oiled machine had been a woman named Eleanor Price. Everyone at Sterling and Reeves thought they knew Eleanor. To them, she was a reliable, kind, and slightly old-fashioned secretary who occupied the desk nearest to the partners' offices. She was the institutional memory in a company that often seemed afflicted with collective amnesia. She remembered every birthday, knew that Mr. Sterling took his coffee black with one precisely placed sugar cube, and could locate a missing client file from 2005 in under a minute, navigating the labyrinth of both physical cabinets and confusing digital servers with equal grace. She was a fixture as permanent and expected as the view of Lake Michigan from the conference room window. They took her constant, competent presence for granted, a comforting piece of furniture in the ever-changing landscape of corporate life. That was until the Tuesday morning the partners called her into the glass-walled conference room. The summons came not through her desk phone, but through a terse, apologetic email from Mr. Sterling's new executive assistant. The subject line was simply, "Meeting." Eleanor had felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She had seen the whispers, sat in on the meetings about streamlining operations and leveraging synergistic digital paradigms. She had watched as consultants in overly sharp suits paraded through the halls, their tablets filled with graphs that reduced people percentages. She smoothed her simple, elegant wool skirt, took a steadying breath, and walked into the room. 20 minutes later, she emerged. Her posture was as ramrod straight as ever, but her face, usually a mask of pleasant composure, was pale. She held a single, stark white envelope in her hand. She didn't look at anyone as she walked back to her desk. The official reason, delivered with strained politeness by a visibly uncomfortable Ms. Reeves, was strategic restructuring, a necessary shift to a digital-first, streamlined administrative model. The cold, corporate jargon was a fancy, hollow shell designed to hide the simple, brutal truth. After 22 years of loyalty, Eleanor Price was a cost-cutting measure. Her knowledge, her dedication, the very humanity she brought to the office, it was all just a line item on a spreadsheet that needed to be trimmed. The news spread to the open plan office not like a wave, but like a poison gas, invisible, insidious, and leaving a sickening feeling in its wake. Chloe, a 28-year-old junior copywriter with a heart often too big for the cutthroat advertising world, felt a physical pang of guilt. She remembered her first week, overwhelmed and crying in the supply closet, and how Eleanor had found her, offered a tissue, and quietly talked her through the office's unspoken rules. Mark, a 32-year-old digital strategist, shrugged with cynicism he thought made him seem savvy. "It's brutal, but it's business," he whispered to Chloe, not meeting her eyes. "Time to automate, you know? The future." The words felt empty even to him. Back at her desk, Eleanor began the quiet, heartbreaking work of packing her life into a single cardboard box. Her movements were methodical, dignified. She placed inside it the framed photo of her late husband, Arthur, taken on their 30th anniversary. She added the ceramic mug he had made for her, the one that said "World's Best Secretary" in slightly wobbly glaze. A small, thriving pothose plant she had propagated from a single clipping. A stack of handwritten thank you notes from interns long since promoted. Each item was a relic from a life built within these walls. The other employees stole glances, their eyes quickly darting away when she looked up. The office was unervingly quiet, the usual buzz replaced by a stifling, shame-filled silence. No one knew what to say. "I'm sorry" felt insufficient. "Good luck" felt like a betrayal. When the box was full, Eleanor took one last look around. She offered a small, sad smile, not to any one person, but to the room itself, to the memory of what it had been. Then, without a dramatic farewell, she picked up the box, walked past the rows of silent, downcast employees, through the gleaming glass doors of Sterling and Reeves, and into the elevator. The door slid shut behind her with a soft, final sigh. The silence she left behind was louder than any noise. It was the sound of a heart that had just stopped beating. The following weeks proved just how vital that heartbeat had been. The streamlined, digital-first model was an unmitigated disaster. The new automated scheduling system double-booked clients and set meeting reminders for 3 a.m. The shared digital drive, meant to be a model of efficiency, became a chaotic black hole where crucial presentations vanished without a trace. Mr. Sterling's coffee was never right, his temper shorter than ever. The office, once a place of at least superficial warmth, felt cold, impersonal, and utterly adrift. The machine was still running, but it was clanking, sputtering, and tearing itself apart from the inside. One evening, working late to untangle yet another digital mess, Chloe found herself staring at Eleanor's old, deactivated employee profile on the company server. It was a gesture of grief, of missing the woman who had been a quiet anchor in the storm. Under a section listed personal projects, there was a single hyperlink. Almost without thinking, Chloe clicked it. The browser loaded a sophisticated, beautifully designed website called Eleanor's Vintage Vision. And as the home page filled her screen, Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Her hand flew to her mouth. The image she saw that was so unexpected, so profoundly revealing, that it completely reshaped everything she thought she knew about the woman they had so carelessly let go. The story they all thought was over was, in fact, just beginning, and it was far more extraordinary than any of them could have possibly imagined. The hidden masterpiece, the bluish glow of the computer monitor, was the only light left on in the vast, empty office space. Chloe's own reflection was a ghostly overlay on the website that had just loaded, her eyes wide with disbelief. The header, elegantly scripted, read, Eleanor's Vintage Vision, portraits that capture the soul. This was not some simple blog or a collection of blurry vacation photos. This was a professional portfolio, a gallery of stunning artistry that felt completely disconnected from the woman Chloe knew as the efficient, kindly secretary who always had a spare paperclip. The initial photograph on the homepage was a black and white portrait of an elderly man, but it wasn't a standard, stiff studio shot. He was captured in what looked like his own workshop, the background a beautiful blur of old tools and worn wood. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking down at something cradled in his hands, his face a magnificent tapestry of deep laugh lines and furrows of concentration. The lighting was sublime, catching the silver stubble on his chin and the soft, almost reverent look in his eyes. It was intimate, powerful, and told a whole story in a single, frozen moment. Chloe felt a lump form in her throat. This was more than photography. It was empathy rendered in light and shadow. She scrolled down, her mouse clicks echoing in the silent office. Each image was more breathtaking than the last. A young ballerina, not in a pristine tutu on stage, but slumped against a mirrored wall in practice room, her point shoes ragged, her expression a raw mix of exhaustion and unwavering determination. A young couple dancing in a sun-drenched kitchen, their foreheads touching, their love so palpable it felt like Chloe could reach into the screen and touch it. Every subject was an everyday person, yet Eleanor had found something extraordinary in each of them. She hadn't just taken their picture. She had uncovered their essence. Driven by a growing, awe-filled curiosity, Chloe clicked on the About page. A short, professionally edited video began to play, and there was Eleanor, but it was an Eleanor utterly transformed from the woman Chloe saw at the copier. She wasn't wearing her usual conservative cardigan. She was in a simple black turtleneck, her silver hair down and framing her face. She looked directly into the camera, her gaze steady and confident, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. "My late husband, Arthur," she began, her voice calm and melodic, devoid of the usual office pleasantries, "was a photographer. He saw the world in frames and angles of light. He always told me I had the eye, that I could see the story in a person's face before they even spoke it. Her smile turned wistful. But life, as it often does, had other plans. I became the steady job, the reliable income while he chased his dream. I was his biggest supporter, his archivist, his critic, and I never regretted a single moment of it. She paused, and the emotion in her voice was raw and real. When he passed, a part of me went with him. But he left me with two incredible gifts: his immense collection of vintage cameras and a promise he made me make. He made me promise that I wouldn't let our shared dream die with him, that it was never too late to pick up the camera myself. This, she gestured around her, presumably to the studio the video was shot in. This is for him. Eleanor's Vintage Vision is his name, and my promise, kept. It's for anyone who believes that a new chapter can begin at any time, on your own terms. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, blurring the screen. The pieces were crashing together, forming a picture of stunning clarity and profound shame. They hadn't just fired a secretary. They had dismissed an artist, a widow honoring a sacred promise, a woman with a deep and abiding passion they had been too blind to see. Her mind, however, was already racing ahead of her heart. The Finch account. Sterling and Reeves' white whale. For months, they had been trying to land a massive product launch for Alastair Finch, the notoriously private billionaire inventor. Their pitches had been cold, data-driven, focused on market penetration and demographic analytics. They had all failed spectacularly. Mr. Finch was famously impervious to corporate schmoozing. With trembling fingers, Chloe scrolled further down Eleanor's website. There was a section titled Local Chicago Heroes. Her heart stopped. There, staring back at her with intensity she had never seen in any business magazine profile, was Alastair Finch. It was a candid shot. He was in his legendary workshop, surrounded not by sleek corporate gadgets, but by what looked like the intricate innards of an antique clock. He held a tiny gear in his fingers, his brow furrowed not in anger, but in deep, rapt fascination. He wore a simple work shirt, sleeves rolled up, and a look of pure, unadulterated passion lit his face. This wasn't the stern, intimidating titan of industry. This was a tinkerer, a dreamer, an artist in his own right. Eleanor hadn't captured a CEO. She had captured the soul of a creator. This was it. This was the key. Their entire approach had been wrong. They were trying to sell a product to a businessman, but the man himself was a passionate artist who valued soul over spreadsheets. Eleanor, without even trying, had understood him perfectly. A surge of adrenaline shot through Chloe. This was more than just a discovery. It was a revelation. It was a lifeline for the agency and a chance to make things right. She quickly printed the photograph of Finch and the web address. The pages were warm in her hands, feeling less like paper and more like a crucial piece of evidence. She took a deep breath, marched past the empty desks, and pushed open the door to Mr. Sterling's office. He and Ms. Reeves were there, their faces drawn and tense, surrounded by storyboards for another doomed pitch. Chloe, for God's sake, not now. Mr. Sterling snapped, not even looking up from a spreadsheet. This can't wait, Chloe said, her voice firmer than she felt. She placed a printed photograph squarely in the center of his desk. I think I found our solution to the Finch problem. Or rather, I found the person we should have been listening to all along. Ms. Reeves leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the image. Her professional demeanor cracked. My God, she whispered. Where did you get this? This is extraordinary. He looks human. Eleanor took it, Chloe stated. 2 years ago, at a charity event for the Hope Foundation. She volunteered as the event photographer. She let that sink in for a moment, watching the dawning horror and realization on their faces. She didn't just manage our schedules and make our coffee. She understands people on a level we never even considered. We didn't just let go of a secretary, sir. We let go of our greatest strategic asset. The room fell into a silence, so deep Chloe could hear the hum of the computer servers in the next room. The photograph of a passionate, relatable Alastair Finch stared up at them, a silent, powerful indictment of their every failure. The path forward was suddenly, blindingly clear. The only question that remained was whether they were brave enough to take it. The unlikely proposal. The silence in Mr. Sterling's office was a physical presence, thick and heavy with the weight of the printed image lying between them. The photograph of Alastair Finch, captured in a moment of unguarded passion, seemed to radiate a truth so potent it rendered their stacks of market research and sleek presentation decks utterly obsolete. Robert Sterling finally broke the spell, his voice uncharacteristically quiet, almost offensive. She's a secretary, Amanda. A brilliant one, I'll grant you that. The best we ever had. But a secretary. We can't just hire her back as a what? A creative consultant? The board would think we've lost our minds. The optics are a nightmare. He gestured vaguely at the air, as if trying to grasp the absurdity of the idea. Amanda Reeves didn't look away from the photograph. Her sharp, analytical mind, usually focused on bottom lines and quarterly reports, was seeing something else entirely. Look at this picture, Robert. Really look at it. Forget the title. Forget the job description. Our entire campaign has been about specs, features, and market saturation. Cold, hard data. This... She tapped the paper with a perfectly manicured nail. This is about heart, about story. Finch funds at charity gala every single year in his late wife's name. He's a sentimentalist. He's an artist. Eleanor didn't just take a photo. She spoke his language. A language we've been completely ignoring because we were too busy shouting our own. Chloe, emboldened by Ms. Reeves's perception, stepped further into the room. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a fierce, protective certainty. She's more than that, Chloe insisted, her voice gaining strength. Her entire website is a masterclass in personal branding and emotional connection. She's not just dabbling. She's built a legitimate, professional side business from the ground up. We don't need to hire her back to answer phones. We need to hire her. Her mind, her vision. Robert Sterling threw his hands up in exasperation. To do what? Be our in-house company photographer? We're an advertising agency, not a gallery. Amanda Reeves finally turned her gaze from the photograph to her partner. Her eyes held a new, startling conviction. No, Robert, to lead the Finch pitch. The words hung in the air, ludicrous and audacious. Robert actually choked, a strangled cough escaping him. He stared at Amanda as if she'd just suggested they set the office on fire for the insurance money. Lead the pitch? A 64-year-old former secretary who had never once sat in a creative briefing, leading the most important new business presentation in the company's history? It was a 1,000,000-to-1 shot. A career-ending gamble if it failed. But the Finch account was worth tens of millions. They were days, maybe hours, from losing it forever to a competitor. Desperation, as it turns out, is the most potent fuel for improbable ideas. The sheer scale of their failure with their previous approaches made the insanity of this new path somehow seem logical. And so, later that afternoon, they found themselves standing on the pristine porch of a modest but well-kept suburban home, a world away from their glass and steel tower. Robert Sterling clutched a ridiculously expensive bottle of wine, like a shield. Amanda Reeves held a folder containing their most generous and frankly desperate consulting offer. When the door opened, Eleanor Price stood there. She wore paint-splattered jeans and a simple cotton shirt, a far cry from her office attire. She showed no surprise, only a calm, guarded neutrality. Mr. Sterling. Ms. Reeves, she said, her voice even. Did I forget to return my key card? Amanda took the lead, her professional charm dialed to its maximum setting. Eleanor, first and foremost, we owe you a massive apology. What we did was short-sighted, cruel, and the single worst business decision we've made this year. Robert nodded stiffly, adding, The office it's a mess without you, a complete disaster. Eleanor's expression remained unreadable. She offered a small, polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm sorry to hear that. It was never my intention for things to fall apart. Was there something specific you needed? She invited them in, and they stepped into a living room that was not the home of a retired secretary. One wall was a breathtaking gallery of her stunning black and white photographs, perfectly lit and arranged. Another wall was a dedicated workspace, a professional-grade iMac, a Wacom tablet. Shelves lined with books on composition and lighting, and several beautiful vintage film cameras displayed like treasured artifacts. This was not a hobby nook. It was a studio of a working, serious artist. They sat on her comfortable sofa, and they laid out their desperate, humbling plan. They spoke of the Finch account, of their failures, of the photograph. They offered her a consulting fee so large that Robert felt a pang in his wallet just saying the number out loud. They asked her to come back, not to her old desk, but to the head of the conference room table, to take the reins, to be the visionary for a campaign. They clearly could not crack themselves. Eleanor listened. She didn't interrupt. She simply absorbed their words, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes moving between their faces. When they finished, the silence returned. She took a slow sip of the tea she had offered them, her gaze thoughtful. "You saw my website," she stated, not asked. "You saw my work. You appreciate the artistry of it now that you've seen it applied to a billionaire. But let's be perfectly clear. You're not offering me this opportunity because you've suddenly developed an appreciation for the art of portraiture. You're offering it to me because you believe I possess a key to a man you desperately want as a client. You believe my empathy is a tool you can rent." Robert opened his mouth to object, but found he couldn't. She was right, and her directness was disarming. Eleanor placed her cup down on the saucer with a soft, definitive click. "I'll do it." A wave of relief washed over the two partners. But it was short-lived. "I'll lead the pitch," Eleanor continued, her voice now taking on a new, steely quality. "But not for the fee you mentioned, and not as a consultant." She let the conditional hang in the air for a moment, ensuring she had their complete, undivided attention. "I will lead the pitch team. And if we win the account, if I win the account for you, you will hire me on as a permanent, full-time creative director, with a salary commensurate with that title, a full benefits package, and most importantly, a seat at the leadership table. My voice will have equal weight in the direction of this company." Robert Sterling's face went pale. Amanda Reeves simply stared, her business acumen warring with her shock. "And," Eleanor said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation, "my first official act in that new role will be to draft and implement a new company initiative. We will call it the Legacy Program. It will ensure that no employee over the age of 60 is ever again deemed obsolete and offer a severance package. Instead, they will be offered a retraining and mentorship role, pairing their invaluable institutional knowledge with the fresh energy of our new hires. Their experience will become our most valued asset, not a liability to be discarded. Those are my terms." The partners were utterly speechless. The audacity of it was breathtaking. The brilliance of it was undeniable. The sheer, unassailable rightness of it was what truly left them winded. They had come to her home, hat in hand, asking for a lifeline. She had not only thrown them a rope, she had presented them with a blueprint to rebuild the entire ship. She wasn't asking for her old job back. She was demanding they create a new, better one for her and for everyone who would come after. The ball was no longer in their court. She had just taken possession of the entire game. The pitch. The conference room at Finch Industries was known as the Vortex, a nickname earned for its ability to swallow ambitious ideas and spit out the shredded remains of corporate egos. It was a cavernous space of cold, polished steel, dark glass, and minimalist furniture that felt more like a surgical theater than a place of collaboration. The air hummed with the sound of silent climate control, and the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline served as a stark reminder of the empire they were trying to impress. Alastair Finch sat at the head of the immense obsidian table, a patriarch on a throne of his own making. At 75, he was a man carved from granite and old money, his face a map of stern lines and his eyes, sharp and flinty, missing nothing. He steepled his fingers, his impatience a palpable force in the room. "You have 30 minutes, he stated, his voice a low rumble that required no microphone. "My previous meetings today have been profoundly underwhelming. A recitation of numbers I already know. Convince me you see more than just a dollar sign." Robert Sterling, sweating slightly under his custom suit, began the presentation. He clicked to the first slide of a meticulously prepared PowerPoint deck, a graph showing projected market growth. "Of course, Mr. Finch. As you can see, The synergistic potential in the Q4 marketplace, when leveraging our multi-platform analytics, indicates a robust ROI. Finch's eyes glazed over. He looked down at his watch, a simple, ancient timepiece that probably cost more than Sterling's car. It was happening exactly as it always did, exactly as Eleanor had predicted they would. They were selling the product, not the dream. They were talking at him, not to him. Chloe, standing nervously by projector, felt a cold dread wash over her. They were losing him. Already, then, a calm, clear voice cut through the corporate jargon. "Mr. Sterling, if I may." All eyes turned to Eleanor. She had been standing quietly to the side, a still presence in the storm of their anxiety. She didn't wait for permission. She stepped forward, her simple, elegant dress a stark contrast to the dark suits around her. She wasn't trying to blend into their world. She had brought a piece of her own into it. She gently took the clicker from Robert's limp hand. With a quiet click, the graph vanished, and the entire back wall of the vortex was filled with a giant, breathtaking black and white photograph of Alastair Finch in his workshop. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Finch's head snapped up. The bored, imperious mask shattered into an expression of pure, unvarnished shock. He leaned forward, his chair groaning in protest. "Where?" he demanded, his voice hushed with something akin to awe. "Did you get that?" Eleanor didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her own steady and sure. "I took it, sir, at the Hope Foundation Gala 2 years ago. You were explaining to me how that little brass gear in your hand was a prototype for a new joint mechanism in pediatric prosthetics. You weren't talking about market share or profit margins. Your eyes were alight with the pure joy of creation. You were speaking about giving a child the ability to hold their mother's hand again." The room was so silent, you could hear the faint whir of the projector's fan. Robert and Amanda stood frozen, watching a conversation unfold that they were no longer a part of. Eleanor clicked again. The single image was replaced by a series of mood boards, short video concepts, and stylistic frames, all rendered in the same raw, emotional, black and white aesthetic as her photographs. The campaign title, "The Art of Progress," was elegantly displayed. "Our campaign isn't about your new device," Eleanor continued, her voice filling the space, not with volume, but with profound conviction. "It's about that joy. It's about the hands that build, the minds that imagine, the hearts that persevere through 1,000 failed prototypes. We want to tell the story of the inventor, not just the invention, because people don't connect with technology. They connect with the humanity behind it. They connect with the why." For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor spoke. She didn't use a single bullet point. She didn't quote a single statistic. She painted a picture with words and images, describing a campaign that would be a series of cinematic vignettes. They would feature not models, but real engineers, real dreamers, their faces etched with passion and grit, shot in the beautiful, high-contrast style of her portraits. The soundtrack would be minimalist, the focus entirely on the human stories of innovation. It was about legacy, about storytelling, about the soul of this company that had been utterly lost in its own corporate marketing. She wasn't pitching. She was having a conversation. She was reminding Alastair Finch of who he was. When she finished, she didn't ask for the business. She simply clicked off the projector and stood quietly, allowing the silence to settle. It was a silence vastly different from the one that had greeted them. This one was filled with resonance, with the echo of a truth that had finally been spoken. Alastair Finch did not move for a long time. He stared at the blank wall where his own image had just been projected, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of his mouth. He then turned his sharp gaze to Robert Sterling, who seemed to have shrunk several inches in his chair. "You," Finch said, the single word dripping with a mixture of amusement and reproach. "You finally learned to listen." He pushed his chair back and stood up. He didn't walk toward Robert or Amanda. He walked directly to Eleanor Price. He stopped in front of her, looking at her not as a former secretary or a hired consultant, but as a peer, an artist. "This," he said, his voice low and sincere, "this is what I've been waiting for." The other saw a company, a balance sheet. "You," he glanced back at the wall. "You saw the man. The account is yours." See that the work matches the pitch. He extended his hand. Eleanor took it, her grip firm. It will, Mr. Finch. You have my word. The Sterling and Reeves team was left utterly speechless, their faces a kaleidoscope of shock, elation, and sheer, unadulterated awe. They had done it. They had won the impossible account, snatched from the jaws of certain defeat. But as they gathered their things in a daze, the victory didn't feel like it belonged to Sterling and Reeves. The triumph, the genius, the sheer power of that presentation belonged entirely to the 64-year-old secretary they had fired, who had just delivered a masterclass in leadership creativity and emotional intelligence that they would be talking about for the rest of their careers. The car ride back to the office was a blur of stunned congratulations and nervous laughter. But as they stepped out of the elevator into their familiar surroundings, a new tension began to form. The victory was secured, but the promise that had bought it now loomed larger than any client. Eleanor had held up her end of the bargain spectacularly. The question that hung in the air, unspoken but deafening, was whether they would have the courage to hold up theirs. The real work, it turned out, was only just beginning. A new heartbeat, a palpable current of anticipation buzzed through the open-plan office of Sterling and Reeves. The news had spread like wildfire through Slack channels and hushed conversations. They had landed the Finch account. It was a kind of victory that could define an agency for a decade. Yet, the usual post-win celebration, the popping of champagne corks, the raucous high-fives, was conspicuously absent. Instead, a curious, nervous energy filled the space. The entire staff had been summoned for an all-hands meeting, and the unusual gravity of the request had everyone on edge. They gathered in clusters around the central aisle, young interns standing beside veteran account managers. Mark, the digitally native strategist, leaned against a desk, his usual cynicism replaced by a look of genuine curiosity. Chloe stood near the front, her hands clasped tightly, a hopeful smile playing on her lips. The air was thick with unasked questions. How had they done it? What did it mean for them? Mr. Sterling and Ms. Reeves walked to the front of the room. They carried none of the triumphant swagger expected of leaders who had just secured a landmark victory. Instead, they looked humble, contrite. "Team," Mr. Sterling began, his voice carrying through the silent room without need for a microphone. "As you know, we just landed the Finch account." A smattering of applause broke out, but he quickly held up a hand to quiet it. "We landed it, but we couldn't have done it without a radical shift in perspective, a shift that was forced upon us because I was blind." Ms. Reeves stepped forward, her tone softer but no less direct. "We made a mistake, a significant one. We confused experience with obsolescence. We valued efficiency over empathy. And we are incredibly fortunate that the person we wronged was not only gracious enough to teach us a lesson, but is willing to lead us into a better future." They turned in unison, their gaze directed toward the back of the crowd. Every head swiveled. And there she was, Eleanor Price. But she wasn't lingering at the periphery. She walked with quiet confidence through the parted crowd, not toward her old empty desk, but to the front of the room to stand beside the partners. She held a simple folder. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. "Thank you," Eleanor said, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the room. She didn't need to shout. Everyone was leaning in to listen. My conditions for leading the Finch pitch were twofold. The first was a permanent position. Mr. Sterling nodded, his jaw tight with the weight of the admission. "Effective immediately, Eleanor Price is our new director of creative strategy. Her insight, her empathy, and her vision will guide our campaigns moving forward. Her voice will be integral in all leadership decisions. She has more than earned this seat at the table." A wave of shock rolled through the room, followed not by jealousy or confusion, but by a surge of genuine, enthusiastic applause. It was applause for justice, for the underdog, for the validation of truth they all felt but had never voiced. Chloe beamed, clapping so hard her hands stung. Eleanor waited for the applause to settle. She offered a small, gracious smile, then opened a folder she carried. "And my second condition," she continued, "was this." She held up a document for all to see, a proposal for the Legacy Project. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the faces in the crowd. making contact with the older employees, the accountants, the IT support staff, the junior partners in their 50s who had been watching the restructuring with quiet dread. She saw their postures change, saw the wary hope dawn in their eyes. Sterling N. Reeves will no longer offer early retirement packages based on age, she announced, her tone leaving no room for debate. Instead, we will pioneer a company-wide mentorship program. Our most experienced employees in every single department will be formally paired with our newest hires. They will be given the title and compensation of mentors, and their mandate will be to share their institutional knowledge, their hard-earned wisdom, and their invaluable patience. We will not discard our legacy. We will invest in it. We will become a company that doesn't just chase the future, but one that builds it with the wisdom of the past and the energy of the present. That is how you create something that truly lasts. This time, the silence that followed was one profound, stunned absorption. Then the applause began again, but it was different. It was thunderous, emotional, and punctuated with cheers. It was the sound of a culture shifting on its axis. Mark, the cynical futurist, was clapping the hardest, a look of pure respect on his face as he looked toward a senior systems analyst he'd previously dismissed as out of touch. In that moment, the office didn't just get its heartbeat back. It got a new, stronger, more resilient one. Eleanor Price hadn't just gotten revenge. She had started a revolution. She had taken the worst moment of her professional life and turned it into the beginning of her true calling, transforming the entire culture of the place that had let her go in the process. In the weeks that followed, the change was tangible. The office hummed with a new, collaborative energy. Eleanor, from her new office with its view, was a constant, calming presence. She was often seen in creative meetings, not dictating, but listening intently, asking the one question that would unlock a better idea. Mr. Sterling was once seen bringing her a coffee, which she accepted with a warm smile. The cold, impersonal office felt alive again, human again. On Eleanor's new desk sat a new photograph. It wasn't one from her professional portfolio. It was a candid, slightly blurry shot of the entire Sterling and Reeves team, crammed together and laughing after the Finch contract was signed, taken by a beaming Chloe, written on the white border in silver ink with the words, "To our director, who taught us all how to see." They had fired their 64-year-old secretary, thinking her story was over, but they were wrong. Her story was just entering its most exciting chapter, and she was making sure everyone around her got to be a part of it. She proved that it's never too late to start over, to stand up, and to remind the world of your worth. And in the end, she didn't just win back her job, she won a legacy. If this story of resilience and transformation inspired you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that their greatest chapter might still be ahead. For more powerful tales of everyday courage, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Your support helps us tell more stories that matter. Thank you for watching.